This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
As an important stop in his month-long visit to Asia, King Salman of Saudi Arabia is paying a visit to China. To examine what influence his visit will have on the bilateral economic and political relationship and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Hua Liming, former Chinese ambassador to Iran and United Arab Emirates.
King's historical visit to China and his luxury entourage demonstrates the full importance Saudi Arabia attaches to China. And I think the key mission of King's visit to China is to establish a linkage between Saudi 23rd Vision Strategy and China's One Belt, One Road initiative. Let's warmly welcome him.
And Victor Gao Zhikai, chairman of China Energy Security Institute.
The state visit by His Majesty the King of Saudi Arabia to China is a landmark event. As a result of this visit, China and Saudi Arabia will work more closely, not only in the energy sector, but also in helping Saudi Arabia to achieve industrialization and diversification of its economy. The two countries are becoming more and more friendly and brotherly in its relations. President Xi Jinping has called the China-Saudi friendship as a brotherly relationship. Indeed,
and will also be joined from Tokyo via satellite by Takasato Watanabe, professor emeritus at Dorchester University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's take a look at this.
It's no secret that China is Saudi Arabia's biggest oil consumer. But this visit is more than that. Saudi Arabia is seeking to diversify its revenues from a reliance on oil exports, and China hopes to make the Middle Eastern country a trading hub for its ambitious Silk Road revival plan.
The Arabian Peninsula used to be a crossroad of the land and sea routes of the Asian Silk Road. With booming trade and cultural exchanges, it has been a bridge for the East and the West.
Saudi Arabia will take an active part in building the Silk Road economic belt and 21st century maritime Silk Road.
The two countries have already signed 14 deals. Only one of them is about oil. The rest focus on what China is good at: infrastructure, finance, innovation, and space exploration.
Among these deals, the MOU on capacity cooperation and investment is one of the most prominent. This document alone involves 35 major projects worth $65 billion.
King Salman is accompanied by a massive delegation of 1,500 people, including 25 princes and 10 ministers. Chinese officials say that this visit is not a normal diplomatic event, but a strategic move that may decide Saudi Arabia's future. China's rising ties with Saudi Arabia coincides with Riyadh's worsening relations with its traditional ally Washington. In recent years, the U.S. has drastically reduced its oil imports from Saudi Arabia as a result of its own shale gas boom.
They are getting all sorts of military protection and they're ripping off the United States.
Some are also concerned that Trump's victory has led to further uncertainty in the U.S. commitment to Saudi Arabia's security. In a time of change, Saudi Arabia is turning eastwards, while China aims for greater influence in the Middle East. Han Peng, CGTN, Beijing.
Ambassador Hua, in your observation, how does Saudi Arabia position China in its foreign policy and especially in its economic expansion?
After Second World War, traditionally Saudi Arabia's main ally is the United States, but of course it still is. But with the change, a tremendous change of international situation, the gravity of the world politics and the world economy has shifted to East Asia. China is the biggest economy of East Asia. So naturally, Saudi Arabia is turning to China. Of course, traditionally, China is the biggest consumer of oil, and Saudi Arabia is the biggest oil producer, but China, Saudi Arabia now is going beyond the consuming of oil. They are discussing other things like the manufacturing infrastructure and strategically and security cooperations between the two countries.
What do you think of the mutual complementarity of the two economies?
Well, for many years, Saudi Arabia has been the largest supplier of crude oil to China, and energy cooperation is the most important pillar between China and Saudi Arabia. However, the two countries are entering a new era called Energy Plus, mainly because while oil will remain important, Saudi Arabia is pursuing the Vision 2030 initiative. China is promoting the One Belt, One Road initiative, and the two initiatives are actually overlapping to a very large extent. And Saudi Arabia also wants to become a major hub along the One Belt, One Road initiative. That means while the Saudi Arabian friends are promoting the industrialization of their economy, China can lend a good, big helping hand. So the countries are entering energy, which remains important, and Energy Plus. This is a new era for China-Saudi Arabian friendship.
At some particular defining moment, friendship will really be tested. For example, what happened in the year 2008 when the devastating earthquake took place in Wenchuan. Saudi government reached out very quickly to the victims of the disaster. What do you think of this kind of a build-up of the friendship and confidence?
Really, China has been very grateful to Saudi Arabia's assistance. Immediately after the earthquake took place in 2008, Saudi Arabia gave China $60 million in cash and other materials to China without any delay. So for that reason, China has been very grateful to Saudi Arabia's assistance when China was in difficulty.
King Salomon's visit to East Asia also took him to Japan, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Standing by in Tokyo on satellite is Professor Takasato Watanabe. Let's hear what he says about the impact that this trip delivers to Japan, the third biggest economy in the world, and also the second biggest in East Asia. Hello, Professor Watanabe.
Hello, thank you.
Your comments, please.
This matter this can be understood from two angles. The first one is that Saudi Arabia needs much money to modernize their society, transform the society, and also upgrading the living standards of the people. However, United States does not needs much oil from Saudi Arabia because they have the shale oil, as was pointed out by our colleague. Second, but still, the Saudi Arabia needs security. About the security, Trump administration is very, very near to Israel. So Mr. Trump wants to have the relations with Saudi Arabia not because of the America itself, but because of the security leader of the world. And Saudi Arabia needs technology from China and Japan. So technology and modernization method and political necessity for the security are coexisting on this matter.
What do you think of the outcome of his visit in Japan? How many agreements have been reached? What are the pledges of the Japanese authorities in assisting Saudi Arabia realizing its industrialization programs?
Yes. If I can take the concrete example, King Salman asked the president of the Toyota Motors to build a huge-scale automobile factories in Saudi Arabia. It means that he wants to modernize technological aspect of Saudi Arabia. It's one of the examples. The other one is that Saudi Arabia is asked by the Japanese government to open the fund market in Tokyo. So this kind of the monetary capitalism ideas and also security ideas and also modernization of the country itself is important. However, Saudi Arabia does not want to have the too close peoples-to-people relations, because Saudi Arabia is not, the people of there is not given even the voting right. So this is very delicate through the outer world.
Thank you very much, Watanabe, Professor Watanabe. Now, Japan attaches great importance to its foreign relationship with Saudi Arabia. To what degree do you think this aims at restricting the influence of China, or do you think this factor can be easily dismissed, since Saudi Arabia would of course first turn to the two biggest economies in its economic expansion?
Maybe Abe's government has some special intention on his Japan's relationship with Saudi Arabia on China. But I think China would be very happy to see the better relation, or even the development of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Japan, because it helps the economy of Japan and it helps the Saudi Arabia. So I think that this is China's diplomacy and China's foreign policy.
Victor, this trip also took King Salman to Indonesia, which boasts of the largest Muslim population in the world. Now, Saudi Arabia says over and over that King Salman is the custodian of two holy mosques, Mecca and Medina. The third, I'm afraid, is Jerusalem. So how important is the position of Saudi Arabia in the Muslim world?
Of course,
despite the competition from the Persian state of Iran.
Of course, there is no denying that Saudi Arabia remains a spiritual leader among the Muslim countries, and it gives a lot of inspiration to Muslims throughout the country. And the holy mosques you just now mentioned are pilgrimage destinations for all the Muslims throughout the world. Therefore, I think the relations between Saudi Arabia and many Islamic countries where populations are dominantly Muslims are very, very good, and they have strategic influences in many of these countries. And in China, for example, we also have tens of millions of Chinese Muslims. Many of them actually go to Saudi Arabia for a pilgrimage to Mecca. It's very, very natural. And you just now mentioned the relations between Saudi Arabia and Japan. From the Saudi Arabians' perspective, they want to be with friends and with as many countries as possible. They actually export crude oil more or less in equal amount to China, to Japan, or even to South Korea. So all these three East Asian countries are very important to Saudi Arabia. And I think Ambassador Hua is absolutely correct. China will have no problem if Japan or other countries focus on economic cooperation with Saudi Arabia. The more, the better. And China can play its unique role in helping in the infrastructure building up as well as the industrialization driving Saudi Arabia.
Let me go to Professor Watanabe. Hello. Now, Indonesia is proud of its process of democratization in the wake of President Suharto's rule, which was viewed very much like a military junta. The autocracy had indeed ensured the economic prosperity, but at the same time, the autocracy itself spelled a lot of dissent. With the end of his regime, Indonesia, which has the largest Muslim population, was able to navigate its own course of transforming the military regime into a democracy. Do you think in this particular area Saudi Arabia can learn something following 9/11, after which the United States accused Saudi Arabia of tightening its control on the ideology, which was viewed as pretty conservative? Now, do you think, as you said earlier, that country does not have the free voting rights for the individuals, does not encourage individual liberty? Now, as a democracy, what does Japan have to say on this aspect of transformation, social and economic alike?
In principle, Japan wants to have the very modernized society even in the Arabic states. However, Japanese administration, especially at this time, Mr. Abe's cabinet, it is involved in the political and economic scandals, very serious one these days. However, as a whole of Japan wants to have good relations, better relations with Arabic countries and Islamic countries, not for the religion, not for the people, but for the economic ties. So this is very simple, that economic ties, and for us Japanese, and security matters for Saudi Arabia with the technology from China and Japan for its modernization of the society of Saudi Arabia. I think that's all.
Thank you very much. That's Professor Watanabe. And we are also joined here by Ambassador Hua Liming and Victor Gao Zhikai. We are here to discuss the impact of the current visit by King Salman of Saudi Arabia to China, as well as Japan, Indonesia, and Malaysia. This is a very meaningful trip, by the way, in diversifying the Saudi economy and in its general economic expansion. We'll be back in a short while. Please stay with us.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all.
The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. The political institutions in Saudi Arabia have caused a lot of scrutiny from especially Western countries following 9/11, and especially the rise of Islamic extremism for one reason or another. Why, Ambassador Hua Liming, has Saudi Arabia not been seriously undermined by the impact of the Arab Revolution, which fundamentally changed some of the Gulf states and North African countries, such as Egypt, Libya? To my knowledge, Saudi Arabia is known for the combination of a state and church. Does this unique political system have any unique benefits for the social stability of the monarchy?
I think, first of all, the wealthy of the Saudi Arabia, whatever the system is, the population, the Saudi Arabian people have been well financed by the government because of the big finance capability the government has. So the Saudi people, they are in much better situation than the Egyptians, than the Syrians, than the Libyans. So this is the reason.
Saudi Arabia, along with Russia and Venezuela, may have been blessed by the oil deposits. At the same time, a resource curse could also wreak devastation and disaster with those countries who overwhelmingly rely on oil exports. This time around, what can be done to really diversify the Saudi economy? Do you think the Saudis are ready? Because they have long been seduced by the comfort and the wealth of the oil dollars.
Well, if we objectively look at the situation in Saudi Arabia, I think several things stand out very clearly. One is stability. Secondly, it's the control of the political situation. And thirdly, as the ambassador correctly pointed it out, the government's big financing of the social welfare, promoting for employment, etc. And I would say the Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 is partially driven out of their desire to create more jobs, to diversify the economy so that there will be greater stability in the society going forward. And I think all these are very important driving forces in Saudi Arabia, and I think the key is to make this big leap of faith forward from purely relying on oil to oil and plus. And this is difficult to transform. However, I think now that the government and the family of the king and the people, the corporates, the are all committed to Vision 2030, and with the help of many countries, including in particular countries like China, who want to join this initiative.
Particularly in the area of infrastructure construction. Thank you very much. Let me go to Professor Watanabe. Hello.
Hello.
One of the major reasons for the United States to phase out its reliance on the oil exports from Saudi Arabia and other GCC member states is the instability and the volatility of the Middle East region. Now, China has deployed its own flotilla to escort tanks and cargo vessels in the Somali waters. Now, you are talking about rewriting the pacifist constitution. Does it mean automatically that the self-defense forces of Japan, quote-unquote, will be deployed somewhere in the Middle East to assist the mission of protecting international and maritime security?
About the security, military point of view, United States' concern is to have some, you see, the liaison office in Arabic states areas on the Saudi Arabia to settle the matters in Syria, Iraq, Iran, and those areas. The second one for the United States is that to keep the opinion or mouth in that area, it increases the position of the United States bigger in those areas throughout the world. And third, for Japan, the people want to have better relations with the Arabic countries, including Saudi Arabia, but economic circles want to have more relations, giving support to the people of Saudi Arabia by having economic, benefit like open capital monetarism. So these are complex, but for Japan, if the economy of the Saudi Arabia and those areas are good, it is perfect, not more than that.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hua and Victor. During his official visit, one of the major projects that King Salman attended was a donation of a big library to Peking University, which means millions of books in Arabic language will be donated at the same time to research and students of this prestigious university, which might be called the British Oxford or American Harvard. Now, having said this, does Saudi Arabia, or can it possibly play any role in stabilizing the situation in our Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, where we have had the chronic problem of East Turkestan Islamic movement that encourages the rise of Islamic fundamentalism? China, of course, is not very happy about this, but SCO, one of the SCO missions is, of course, to fight one of three evil forces: separatism, terrorism, and extremism. Do you think in this particular regard, the Saudi authorities stand ready to assist China in maintaining our regional stability?
Of course, unfortunately, Saudi Arabia is the holy place for all Muslims, but as well as is the native land of Wahhabism. So Saudi Arabia has more or less, they've been involved in some activities of Wahhabism in Arab countries and Muslim countries. China's hope to, I think, for Saudi Arabia is not to help China, to have to stabilize the China's society without interfering in China's internal affairs. I think this is the most important thing China is expecting for Saudi Arabia.
And do you think the Saudi government is clearly aware of the urgency and sensitivity of this issue about the social and political stability in Xinjiang?
Let me make 2 points. First of all, Saudi Arabia has a lot of inspiration and influence over Muslims throughout the world, including in China and including in China's Xinjiang Autonomous Region. That's a fact. We need to acknowledge that. Secondly, I would say those Uyghur extremists or terrorists playing havoc in Xinjiang and other parts of China, they are not true Muslims. They misuse or even abuse the so-called Muslim faith. to achieve their political agenda. And their political agenda is actually to form a so-called Greater Turkic Empire and achieve the independence of so-called East Turkestan, which is China's Xinjiang province. And I don't think religion has a major impact in this particular separatist or splittist movement. We need to be very, very clearly oriented to their political agenda.
But I'm afraid, Ambassador Hua, we need to take a second look at the profound influence of religion on the Middle East. For example, sectarian violence between Sunni and Shiites, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, particularly after the Obama administration lifted the economic sanctions against the Persian state since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Don't you think Saudi has been seriously upset and is not very happy about many other things? For example, the United States refused to punish Syria after it allegedly violated the ban on chemical weapons a few years ago. And at the same time, despite the budget deficit, Saudis spend so much on the war in Yemen, a neighboring country. Do you think this is a proxy war that has also exhausted much of the coffers of Saudi Arabia? This is, of course, a big question that covers a lot.
First, I wouldn't agree to say that the hostility, the present hostility between Iran and Saudi Arabia is the dispute among Shia and Sunni. We remember until 1979, the Iranian Revolution, the relation between Saudi Arabia and Iran was very good because they were both allies of the United States and they were the guardians of the United States in the Gulf and in the Middle East. Only after 1979, when after Iranian Revolution, the relations deteriorated and they became enemies to each other. So I think the background is the U.S. policy, not the Shia and the Sunni Muslim. I think it has been created by some powers in the world. And really, Saudi Arabia has consumed a lot of its energies for its neighboring countries. So Syria and Yemen, I think the cost has costed Saudi Arabia very much.
And do you foresee a long-term animosity between the two major regional players, Saudi Arabia and Iran, vying for regional influence and leadership somehow? Do you think this is a kind of, I won't say this is a dogfight, but this is indeed a very tough competition?
Yes, Saudi Arabia they regard themselves as the leader of the Muslim world, but the Iran always consider themselves a global power. They are going to talk with the United States and China, Russia, these big powers. So I think there's no competition between the Iran and the Saudi Arabia, or as the leaders of two sections of the Islam.
But there is obviously an axis of alliance against the United States somehow in the process of civil strife in Syria, if not post-war reconstruction in this war-torn country of Syria. So this axis is composed of Russia, Iran, and Turkey at the exclusion of Saudi Arabia. And this is indeed something annoying for Riyadh, don't you think so?
I think so. Riyadh will be very unhappy with this kind. So still, Riyadh still is doing something in Saudi Arabia, in Syria.
Probably our friends in Saudi Arabia may learn a lot from what President Xi Jinping said in Cairo in his policy speech. China does not seek to have a proxy war or sphere of influence. And that perhaps enables China to be a friend that can be trusted by all players in the Middle East. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.